They were very quietly, sneakily taking up this offering for me and my family. And I got pulled into the center of the room at a church service and handed this Ziploc bag with, it was around $78 or something like that, in change, which was mostly panhandled. And it felt so precious that, I was struggled to even note. And yet they were sitting there saying, we know you have everything you need, and so we really want you to all be able to go out for dinner once you know that the surgery has been successful, and you better tell us what you ate. It was amazing.
What if faith was never meant to be contained in programs? And what if we've mistaken structure for substance? Maybe the call isn't to do more, but to be more present. This is Journey with Care, a podcast by CareImpact, where curious Canadians find inspiration to love others well through real-life stories and honest conversations. I'll never forget this one walk I took with my son through our neighborhood. It turned into something right out of the Twilight Zone. You see, there's this one house we always walk past. It's immaculate all the time. The lawn is perfectly trimmed, the driveway spotless, everything just so perfect. And this one lady that lives there makes sure of that. There was one day where I saw her using a leaf blower to get those last leaves off her tree in the fall so that they couldn't fall on their own and that they would be taken care of. But on this particular day, as we were walking by, we saw this woman sweeping her grass. That's right, she was sweeping her grass. And if that wasn't weird enough, we continued to walk. Her next door neighbor was mowing his driveway. Not the lawn, the driveway. I felt like I was in the Matrix. It was bizarre and hilarious. But it also stuck with me because it made me think, how often do we try to control or clean what doesn't actually need fixing? How much energy do we spend trying to keep things looking pristine when life, real life, is anything but tidy? Sometimes we need to get out of our spaces, out of our weird comfort zones, and get into what's real. And that's why today's conversation matters so much. We're talking about what it means to live faithfully and fully in messy places where pain, poverty, and presence intersect. Our guest, Erin Oxford, has been doing this for years as an executive director and pastor at the Dale Ministries in downtown Toronto. She's not interested in sweeping the grass or putting on appearances. She's committed to being with people right where they are, putting presence over programs. This episode is a real invitation to rethink what it means to be the church in the middle of the street, not just inside our walls. So let's get right into it. Wendi, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Erinn, it is so good to have you here in studio. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, Wendi.
Oh, I'm so excited to introduce, so many people across Canada, but to introduce more people to you and the story that you live out. And I'm looking forward to unpacking a little bit more about faith in action, moving beyond programs into radical presence. But before we go into your story, I'd love to just open up with a fun icebreaker, if you will. So I'm going to ask you, Erinn, if community were a piece of furniture, what would it be and why?
Ooh, I think I would say that community is like a couch, a place that people gather around and on, that generally it's easy to make room for more people. And, the hope, I think, is that it would be a place of comfort and safety, that good conversations can happen while you're sitting on it. So there's an intimacy, I think, to a couch.
Yeah.
That is like community.
I like that. And that really actually represents you well. In when I got to know you, I felt like we were two long lost friends sitting on a couch catching up, and we had community. So a couch is a perfect example. Erinn, let's dive in a little bit to your story of presence over programs. Can you share a moment when you realized that presence mattered more than the programs you delivered?
Yes. Well, I think that when I consider the earliest days of what was to become the Dale, we were in very serious crisis financially. And what was ironic at that time was that we had this flourishing community. And so in that moment, we knew that things needed to change, that we weren't going to have a building anymore, that programming, for example, was going to look very different or might not even exist. But that what was most important was that we would be able to gather together in community. And so it really became about presence in the neighborhood, about presence to people, and not about the things that we can program into our day. And it was incredible.
Yeah, so what you're telling me is quite counterintuitive to the way that ministries often go into more buildings, more bigger buildings, more programs, more containers, and you essentially got rid of a lot of containers. You didn't lose your essence and your presence in the community, but tell me a little bit from a leadership perspective. Did you get any pushback on that, or what led you to make some of those radical steps to move away from building ownership and more of the containers, if you will?
Yeah, I knew that we needed to really strip things down. And the decision to do that was, again, motivated sort of, the reality is that it was motivated out of crisis. The reality was that we couldn't afford the building that we actually didn't own, but leased at the time. So the two options, it seemed, were either close completely, like just this can no longer exist, we can't do it anymore, or reimagine how we were going to be a ministry or a church. And so the plan became that we were going to extinguish a lot of things, including expense. And for us, that was very wrapped up in our building. And I knew, though, at the time that we had this community who was very familiar with what it means to be transient. Many people at the Dale, understand what it is to not have a home, and that we could learn a great deal directly from the community. That while I have journeyed with people my entire adult life who have experienced homelessness, I've never been homeless myself. And so this was an opportunity for me to shift my posture.
That is beautiful. Rather than seeing homelessness and transiency as a problem to fix, you leaned in and said, what makes our people, our community so resilient? And is there something we can learn? Because you could also take the flip side of things and say, you know what, we can't afford to help community. Our budgets are stripped thin, and almost make a building a non-negotiable as this is the church. But you put that on the chopping block for the sake of being present in the community. And I think that is a testament to the work that you're doing. Can you tell me a little bit of a day in the life of being part of the Dale community? If I were part of this community, what would I experience?
Well, the Dale, we like to say that we're nomads with a schedule. And so one of the things that helps that work is that the schedule piece of that. So you never have to wonder really where you will find us on a particular day, because it will be the same place on that particular day. And our weekly schedule includes, on a Sunday, we do gather for worship, and we're setting apart that time for that purpose. It's very come as you are. On Monday, we have a drop-in where people can gather and play games and chat and have a cup of coffee or tea or hot chocolate. And then we eat a meal together. And everything we do at the Dale, people are invited into full participation of it. And so it's not just something that I or our staff team are doing for others, but we're trying to do it together. And so, a drop-in, for example, there's help from our core community to set up the room, to clean up after, those kinds of things. So you'd be invited into those kinds of jobs. And we have a breakfast together. We have social time in yet another building. We are outside in the same parkette beside a health center every Wednesday, where we have an outdoor drop-in. We do art together on another day. And, there's a lot of walking alongside one another in the ways that each of us might need. So if somebody needs help to get to an appointment, or if somebody needs assistance with cleaning up their place to avoid eviction, whatever it is, we will try to do. We know we can't do everything.
No, you can't. But at the same time, and we're not saying here, I'm not hearing you say that presence overrides any programs or schedules or structure. There's intentionality in your planning. However, your presence manages what you say yes to, what you can say yes to, in its very relationally driven, which I think is something that we can learn from. Did you feel like, as personally as a leader navigating this with your community, did you feel that tension of like losing control in some sense of what the Dale should look like, and really shared ownership of that? I imagine there would be some tension involved of leading, but also walking alongside.
Yeah, I feel like that's a tension, right? Or a polarity that I'm trying to negotiate all the time. Like, how do I offer a sense of leadership, if you will, while also being a servant to the community? How do I listen to the feedback really well of the community? And I sought that out at the beginning. I really wanted to know what people could imagine for this place, and knowing that not every idea was going to be able to work. Yeah, I feel like I'm always doing a bit of that dance. But I think what matters generally is holding the same posture and knowing that this is also a community for me. And I am very cared for here too. So that, again, it's not just us, them, stuff. It really is us together.
Tell me more about that, of how you feel cared for in this way.
Well, my life, I guess for all of us, we have different traumas and crises that we experience. Along the way, I've found myself being a caregiver for some of the closest people to me in my life. My mother lived in hospital for 13 years before her death, and I was caring for her all along. And my husband has multiple sclerosis, and that impacts him and us and the way that we're moving through the world. I've also chosen to be present in some very difficult things, experienced a lot of grief. And I think this community, the Dale community, has invited me again and again and again to be willing to share vulnerably about the things that I struggle with. And they don't respond with anything trite, because they know too what it is to struggle. And so I've been poured into that way. One story I sometimes tell, because it was so impactful, was that I had told the community that Dion, my husband, was going to risk doing a surgery that was this potential cure for the disease that he has. And it was very expensive, and it wasn't going to happen in Canada because it wasn't even allowed. And we didn't know how we were going to do it. We put out this call to friends and family to see if anybody would be willing to help us. And it was overwhelming because we had everything that we needed in like 24 hours. But my community at the Dale was upset that because it had happened so quickly, they hadn't yet been able to participate in helping. And so I didn't know that for a few weeks or however long, they were very quietly, sneakily taking up this offering for me and my family. And I got pulled into the center of the room at a church service and handed this Ziploc bag with, I can't remember the exact number, but it was around $78 or something like that, in change, which was mostly panhandled. And it felt so precious that,
Wow.
I was struggled to even know that I
Widow's
should
mite.
use it. It was exactly the widow's mite. And yet they were sitting there saying, we know you have everything you need. And so we really want you to all be able to go out for dinner once you know that the surgery has been
Wow.
successful, and you better tell us what you ate. So they were also offering me this accountability to use their gift. It was amazing.
Wow. That is amazing. And it's a two-way thing, though, to enter into the humanity and the vulnerability of each other, to be able to receive and also to share vulnerably where you have need and to open up in that way. And I think that is a good challenge for so many of us who are in ministry, who do care for others, that we need to have things together. But in fact, in our own vulnerability, in our own story, people enter in. Now, you're a big proponent of story. In fact, I would love our audience to understand more these story days that you have brought together. It's getting bigger and bigger every year. I keep following one of these years. I will be in Toronto for it.
I can't wait for
unless
it,
you come
Wendi.
here to Winnipeg. But tell me a little bit more the power of story and why we do it, not just to sensationalize the story, but to enter into the lives of others. And you wave that flag, but tell me more.
I think that story is one of the most powerful things that we can share with one another. Everybody has one. And I think that there's something that humanizes us when we're able to share stories. And, I have a friend who has said, it's also one of the most decolonized things that you can do because it invites everybody together to be listener and sharer. A number of years ago was prompted to wonder if there was a way to gather people who especially had a heart to address issues around poverty and injustice, motivated by faith. And, there were a lot of things out there, conferences and so on, that were available if you wanted that kind of thing. And I was interested in discovering if there was something alternative that maybe wasn't as readily available. And Story Night was the first attempt at this. And so we gathered and we shared stories of lament and hope. And I think that night and the subsequent story events that have turned into story days, there really is something special about sitting in what I would describe as the messy middle of a lot of things. I think everyone in the room at some point doesn't share the experience of the storyteller, and there might be some discomfort that comes out of that, right? If it's not familiar to you, you don't know, you don't understand. But what we're choosing to do is, what we're trying to choose to do is to be able to communicate across difference. And somehow story enables that more to happen, especially in our increasingly polarized world where, we're forced to choose a side and even push away the other in doing so. But what's lost then is the hope for communication and maybe learning.
Yeah, because if we don't stop to listen to people's story and we are focused on making programs and doing things out of Christian, maybe good intentions, and maybe it's repeated and so it's uncontested, of course we're going to do this program, but we haven't stopped to listen. That really informs how we show up, isn't it? And how we show up, what we do, more than just doing things that don't necessarily connect with people's story. I love that. And it is a unifier for people that would otherwise not sit in a room together, otherwise not connect over a program. But as people, we all have a story.
That's right. We all do. And it is so compelling, right? To sit there and hear somebody share out of their own experience and from wherever they've come from. And I think it actually serves to pull us together. It reminds us of our common humanity, which is something I'm talking about at the Dale all the time, that we're more alike than we are different. Obviously, there's differences in the way that we look and where we grow up and all of those things, but we also are the same.
And it's no doubt in that posture why you galvanize such a broad range and group of people known as the Dale community. But I also can't help but notice on your social media, and we stay connected online more than in person. However, there's a lot of grief entering into people's story as well, particularly people with vulnerabilities. And there's a lot of grief and lament and things that are messier that people might say, you know what, my heart just can't handle it. Tell me what that is like, walking through the difficult areas, the messy middle, like you've referred to. Ongoing, it's not just a day of lament, it's every day. What's that like?
Oh, well, sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I would also say that it is so deeply good. And, I think it was C.S. Lewis who talked about the fact that when you know grief, you're also then able to know joy. Like that,
yes,
that one births the other and vice versa, or that when you've known love, when you've had deep relationship with people, that is going to open up deep grief when those people are no longer there. But that you wouldn't want to give up that love, like that, your grief is a sign of that somehow. And, in a community like the Dale, we have a lot of opportunity to live into all of that. And I have noticed in a community that is very familiar with loss that there's also a very large capacity to be grateful for the simplest of things. And so that's been really true of it too. And I'm grateful for that. I think I often say that I do believe the Beatitudes are true, as hard as they are. I haven't always understood what it even means. Like, what does it mean to be blessed when you're grieving or, living in poverty? But what I've discovered is that blessing is in many ways about those things being held as sacred by God, that the root of the word blessing is that to make sacred. And so that does make sense to me. And so we get to walk in these sacred places on holy ground.
Yeah, no, that's really wise words right there. And not everybody is going to find themselves in downtown Toronto, in the community that you find yourself. That is a special calling, or a calling that you have been placed. God has brought you into that community. Talk to me as a person who attends a church that is wanting to navigate this, wanting to take steps closer into community. Maybe they're not called to sell their building or get rid of their building. Maybe they are. Maybe they're called to shift their thinking so they can be more radically present with those in the community. What steps would you suggest that we take?
I would say that I'm not anti-building. I think a lot of people think that maybe because of my experience of not having one, that I don't appreciate what they mean, but I actually really do. The Dale relies on the buildings of others. What I would say, though, is I would maybe challenge people to get out of the building more. And so what would it look like if you were to practice presence in your neighborhood by regularly walking through it, getting to know the people, whoever they are, that are, maybe sitting or hanging out in the same spots all of the time. And that could be a wide variety of people, right? Like people not necessarily who are connected to the street exclusively. People are out and about in the neighborhood. And so get to know your neighborhood even more if that's something that you don't know yet. And maybe explore ways to do things where you're going to people rather than expecting people to come to you. And I think that can be a good challenge for people. And if you're wondering about how to connect maybe more deeply with people who are living very much in the margins, I think there are some simple steps toward really humanizing people that you might experience some fear of. And so, if you see somebody sitting or panhandling or obviously in distress, making eye contact, saying hello, do those early steps of relationship building. I find that so many of the folks at the Dale wear their challenges very close to the surface in a way that they can't hide them, even if they might very much want to, actually, but can't because they're on display. Like I, too, am challenged. I just might have the capacity to push down those things and manage them and decide when I'm going to share those things with people. But even just knowing that, approaching people knowing that might open up conversation in a different kind of way. I think those are some things.
Sure. No, that's very helpful. And so it's really not so much, what you're telling me is not so much a formula of what you do, but maybe in a posture, maybe take the load off our backs and be more in a posture of curiosity and leaning in and listening. Maybe the answers and the connection points and the shape that we are present in the community is interactive. It's a mutually, it's co-created in community as we become more in proximity to the people. They are part of the solution we need to find. And what does it mean to be present as a church?
Absolutely. It's easy for anybody, but including the church, to presume that we know what people need. And we don't always know, or we could have it wrong.
Right.
And so to be out there connecting with people relationally, that's where you're going to find out what somebody else needs. You're going to become maybe more aware of your own needs, and then you can be working it out together.
I keep coming back to it, but it's always so relevant in these kind of conversations about Matthew 25. It's not so much us bringing Jesus out into the community, but often getting out of the building brings us into proximity of where Jesus is, in the prisons, on the street, giving them the cup of water. And that's where we are revealed the presence of Christ and what church, where two or three are gathered, what it actually looks like beyond what I've allowed myself to imagine. It colors outside the lines, but I think it's a beautiful invitation that God has given us, all of us, in all our communities. We don't have to be waiting for only those if I'm in the inner city or I'm this part of the city or this part of the province, then I should look like that. It's something suburban churches, rural churches can put into practice as well. It's a posture.
It is a posture, yeah. Relationship. I mean, I think we're built for relationship. I think we're built for community. We need it. I do believe in a triune God who lives in community. And so to recognize that we need that, we need each other. We're all going to have different needs at different times. We all have different gifts. And that's what's so beautiful about community, is that it can be this wonderful tapestry. It doesn't have to look one way.
Okay, Erinn, I have one more question before we wrap things up about faith and the notion to need to feel productive. I don't know about you, but I like to, when I put my heart into something, I want to see it go somewhere. And I don't think I'm alone in our North American mindset. But do you have advice for somebody who might be wrestling whether their faith is making a difference, like whether presence matters, if it's just like sitting around a table, but then what? How do you wrestle that out? And can you help me?
Ooh, I can try to help. I'm not sure. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think I understand that, like wanting to be productive, wanting to see results, even to use that language. I think I have felt very challenged in my own life to notice that, it's easy to feel like we have to be doing and accomplishing in order to have value. I've had a number of experiences where I thought that I stood to lose a lot of things or experience a deep level of failure. And that in those moments, I had to say, well, who am I? Like, if all of those things happen, who am I? And realizing, along with the still small voice of God, that I don't need to do anything, that I'm simply beloved because I am a child of God. What God calls us to do, what the Creator has called us to do, is to love Him and love our neighbors. And that those are the two greatest things that we can be doing.
Yeah.
So love and relationship, all of those things move sometimes slowly and take time. And, sometimes they're going to be grand gestures and sometimes they're going to be tiny little things along the way. I think I've noticed that a lot of the little things along the way really do add up to something much bigger than maybe I even realize. And I think I feel challenged to be not just about doing, but about being. And that it's sort of ironic, I suppose, but as I rest in just being, I feel better equipped to live fully into who I am, which will include, some things happening along the way, of course. So knowing your value, which is not an easy thing to do. I'm not saying that I find that easy, but I know that I have to keep going back to that again and again.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about, and hopefully we can do that sometime soon. But is there one last challenge you can put out to all our listeners that we can put into practice, being present over programs that we could take to heart?
I think I would just want to leave people with the encouragement to know that when you are actively being present, that you are doing something deeply important, and that presence births relationship and love. It helps you to understand your neighborhood, the people around you, and even yourself more. And so presence is not nothing. It's actually a lot of something.
Well, there you have it. Give yourself permission to be present with others this week. And we just thank you so much, Erin, for coming onto the podcast. And I'm just wondering if you would stick around with us. We like to end our episodes with a little fun game of
Care Lingo.
All right, Wendi. So this is the time of the show, obviously. If listeners are new to the show, this is where we introduce a word or phrase that is kind of in the care impact, caring space, social services spaces, like words that when people hear them, sometimes they're church phrases, words that when people hear them are phrases that people might not know what it means if they heard it for the first time. And, kind of that weird language that we want to give some definition to. So I'm going to give some wrong definitions, which I usually do. And today's word or phrase is holy disruption. Now, when I saw this word on the docket, I was immediately taken back to when I was a kid. My dad used to love watching the 1960s Batman. I don't know if you know, with Adam West, but every episode, Robin always said, holy something Batman. And this made me think, this is probably something Robin would say, like if he was going to church and the wine was swapped out with grape juice, and he's like, holy disruption, Batman. Someone swapped the communion grape juice with real wine, and then something crazy would happen. So that's what came to mind when I thought about her holy disruption. Erin, have you had an encounter with a real holy disruption in your life that you can recall?
a real holy disruption.
Or if someone swapped the grape juice with the wine in your case.
Well, I'm not sure if I should tell this story or not, but I will, I think, because at the Dale, we're always trying, well, we live life kind of on the edge all the time and things are messy and so on. And we didn't check the bread one day when we were about to do communion. At the time, we were serving each other. And I went to hand the bread to a person and they turned it over and they said, "Jesus is green today."
Oh, dear. So that was a holy disruption.
That's
That was a holy disruption. There was mold on the bread. So, we recovered and we figured it out. But in the moment, it was a disruption. Absolutely.
Well, in the case of it being green and Batman, maybe it was something the Penguin brought, or the Riddler, they're very green.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we could carry on that.
Something that they would do to disrupt communion, those evildoers.
Well, I'm pretty sure if I would have said that when I was younger, then my mom would have threatened me with a bar of soap. Like, don't cuss like that. It would have come across as a Christian cuss word, maybe. But do you want the real definition?
Yeah, what's the real definition? What's a holy disruption?
Well, holy disruption is a theologically loaded catchphrase where God just lovingly just reroutes me and wrecks my plans, rearranges my comfort zones, and kind of drags me soul first into maybe something of justice or compassion or an obedience. I know for Harold and myself, holy disruption was plucking us out of the jobs we loved, the ministry we loved, and said, "Hey, we want you to start CareImpact." And so I'm sure we can all relate to certain things that just kind of disrupted our plans, but they definitely were God in the midst, even if we didn't understand it all. And so Proverbs 16:9 says, "The heart of a person plans their way, but the Lord establishes their steps." So there you go. Holy disruption.
Holy disruption. Thank you so much, Erin. I'd like to meet you in person, but maybe not break bread with you, if that's okay.
Come back to Winnipeg.
Yeah. I will bake you a loaf of bread. It'll be fresh and wonderful.
Beautiful.
All right. Until next time, remember to always stay curious. Thank you for joining us on Journey with Care. To get more information on weekly episodes, upcoming opportunities, or to connect with our community, visit journeywithcare.ca or find CareImpact on Facebook and Instagram. Or just check the show notes for these links and all the links related to this episode. Share your thoughts, leave us a message, and be part of a network of individuals journeying in faith and purpose. Together, let's discover how we can make a meaningful impact.